Hey guys, tonight we're stepping off a small reed boat onto the muddy bank of the Nile. The sky is just beginning to lighten, a soft strip of rose and gold stretching over the eastern horizon, but already the air feels heavy. Your sandals sink slightly into the damp ground, the mud cool between your toes for now. But you know that in an hour, it's going to bake into a crusty, cracking shell. Somewhere upriver, a fisherman calls out to another, his voice carrying across the still water, and a pair of herons lift off from the reeds, wings beating slow and lazy. You look around, expecting maybe the kind of warm welcome that movies like to give time travelers. Instead, there's a man hauling baskets of something that smells like half-rotten onions, and another swatting flies from his donkey's face with a bundle of palm fronds. No one cares that you've just arrived from 3,000 years in the future. No one is offering you a drink, a towel, or even a Welcome to Ancient Egypt brochure. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing there, watching a pale mist drift off the water when you realize your legs are already itchy. The mud is alive. Tiny insects, invisible to the eye, but very much interested in your ankles. You give an awkward little hop to shake them off, which earns you a glance from a woman balancing a basket of papyrus stems on her head. She doesn't smile, but the corners of her mouth twitch like she might be laughing on the inside. There's a faint, salty tang in the air, though you're hundreds of miles from the sea. That's the Nile's secret. It carries whispers from far-off places, smells from delta marshes and upstream forests, a constant, subtle reminder that everything is connected. You get the sense the locals don't really notice anymore. The way you stop noticing the hum of your refrigerator at home, barefoot boy darts past you, clutching something wrapped in palm leaves. He's grinning, but keeps glancing over his shoulder. Moments later, a taller boy sprints after him, cursing in a language you don't understand but which sounds very convincing in its fury. You guess there's a snack involved, or maybe something shinier, and already, without even having done anything, you feel slightly behind. People here move with a kind of practiced efficiency, a quiet knowledge of what needs doing and when. There's no waiting for you to get your bearings. If you stand still too long, you'll just become part of the scenery. Somewhere in the reeds, a frog croaks, followed by a series of small splashes, fish breaking the surface to snatch at morning insects. You remember that this river was the lifeblood of the entire civilization, a single thread without which none of this would exist. And yet, for the people here, it's not history. It's breakfast, it's work, it's washing, it's home. Your stomach growls, but before you can think about food, you hear a low rumble behind you. Not thunder, but a cart's wooden wheels grinding over the packed dirt. The driver gives you a quick once-over before clicking his tongue at the donkey, steering around you without slowing down. If you thought stepping off that boat would give you a dramatic, cinematic moment, Ancient Egypt has just politely declined your request. This is it, your first breath of a day you might not survive. And the sun isn't even up yet. The desert air hits you like someone opening an oven door right into your face. You've barely taken a few steps away from the river's cool mist before the breeze changes, if you can even call it a breeze. It's warm, dry, and oddly textured, as though it's carrying microscopic sandpaper. You instinctively lick your lips, which is a mistake, because the air immediately steals whatever moisture was left. Your lungs feel it too, each breath heavier than the last, with that faint mineral taste that makes you think of a bag of flour left in the sun. Historians still argue whether the air in ancient Egypt was worse during summer or during flood season, but right now you'd be happy to test neither. This is the morning, the supposedly cool part of the day, and you're already wondering if your modern self is built for this. The locals don't seem to notice. A woman in a pale linen shift walks past, balancing a pot of water on her head, her pace unhurried. She's not sweating, not even glistening. Meanwhile, you're halfway to looking like you've been lightly sprayed with oil and then rolled in dust. Your brain starts doing that mental math of, if it's this hot now, what will it be like at noon? The answer is probably like living inside a clay oven someone forgot to turn off. A man tending to a tethered goat gives you a wave, or maybe he's shooing flies. It's hard to tell. The goat is chewing on what looks like a half-dead shrub, apparently unbothered by both the taste and the temperature. You briefly envy it. Goats don't seem to get heat stroke. Off to your right, a small caravan of traders is coming down the dusty road, their donkeys carrying bundles of woven mats and pottery jars tied with rope. The air around them swirls faintly, the sand lifting in gentle spirals as they walk. You've seen dust devils in modern deserts before, but here they seem almost alive, curling and uncurling in the wake of every footstep, and then you feel it, a faint sting on your cheek. Not enough to hurt, but definitely enough to make you blink. You look up, and the horizon seems hazier than before. The desert is sending you its greeting in the form of airborne grit. People here barely notice. They've learned to squint just enough and keep moving. You, on the other hand, are blinking like someone just threw powdered cinnamon in your eyes point when the traders calls out to you, offering what you assume is a greeting. Or maybe it's a warning. You nod and smile, which earns you a curious glance and a shrug. Without stopping, they vanish past you, leaving only a faint scent of date wine and sweat. BY now, your shoulders are starting to feel it, not quite burning, but that prickly warmth that says, you forgot sunscreen. Well, of course you did. The closest thing to sunscreen here is crocodile dung mixed with oil, and while historians still argue whether it actually worked or was just an ancient placebo, you're not ready to try that particular spa treatment. The cluster of palm trees offers a patch of shade ahead, but it's not the lush, cool sanctuary you might hope for. Underneath, the air is just slightly less aggressive. The ground here is dry, packed hard from centuries of feet passing over it. A few beetles scuttle out of your way, vanishing into cracks in the earth. You realize the Nile's edge feels like another world compared to this. There, the air moved. Here, it's more like the air sits on you. Heavy, unmoving, a reminder that the desert isn't so much empty as it is waiting. Waiting to test you. Waiting to see if you'll crack before the sun reaches its peak. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circles lazily, riding a thermal you can almost feel from here. If you had feathers, maybe you could just glide away from this heat. Instead, you keep walking, the river now a thin silver ribbon behind you. Ahead lies the village proper, and with it, whatever this day is planning to throw at you next. You spot a clay jug on the edge of a doorway, its narrow neck stuffed with a wad of woven reed. Your brain immediately translates it into water. Cool, refreshing, life-saving water. You drift toward it like a moth to a lantern. The woman inside the doorway catches your eye and gestures toward the jug, smiling faintly. You mutter a thank you, though you're pretty sure it comes out sounding like a sneeze in her language, and tug the reed stopper free. The smell hits you first. Not unpleasant, just earthy. You tip the jug carefully and watch as a thin, slightly cloudy stream pours into a shallow cup she offers you. You take a sip, and instantly it's clear this is not the bottled, triple-filtered stuff you're used to. It's lukewarm, with a faint grit that rolls over your tongue. Somewhere between the swallow and the aftertaste, you wonder if this is going to end in a very personal archaeological disaster tomorrow morning. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian's stomach was hardened to this, or if they just powered through and accepted the consequences. The woman seems pleased you've drunk it, so you take another cautious sip. This one goes down a little easier. Your body, desperate for hydration, doesn't care about texture right now. You've read about how people would store water in porous clay jars so it could breathe and cool slightly through evaporation, but right now it's only marginally cooler than the air. Still, it's water, and you're not about to complain out loud. Behind you, a boy darts past carrying a bundle of papyrus stalks, nearly clipping your hip. You steady yourself and watch him vanish into a lane where goats are bleating. The woman refills the cup without asking, and you begin to realize that here, offering water isn't a small kindness. It's an obligation, a sacred act. The Nile gives, and they pass it forward. A man approaches with a larger jug slung over his shoulder, the rim bound in leather to keep it from chipping. He's sweating in the heat, but not like you. His is the steady, slow kind of perspiration that comes from years of knowing just how to pace himself. He says something to the woman, and she replies with a laugh that makes him shake his head and grin. You have no idea what just happened, but you're pretty sure you were part of the joke, that as you drain the last swallow, you glance down into the cup and see a tiny speck. Probably sand, maybe something less charming. You flick it away. Try not to think about modern germ theory. It's oddly humbling to realize that, for all your 21st century sensibilities, your survival here hinges on accepting a stranger's lukewarm, slightly gritty water. You hand back the cup and nod your thanks again. The woman waves you on, pointing toward the market road ahead. As you turn, the jug smell lingers in your nose, an odd blend of clay, river, and something green like crushed reeds. It's the smell of life here, and you suspect it's one you'll remember long after the taste fades. A breeze stirs faintly, the kind that teases you into thinking relief is coming before vanishing completely. You swallow, already feeling the desert reclaim what you just drank. The water was a brief truce. The heat is still here, still pressing down, still ready to see how far you can go before you're begging for shade again. The linen tunic they hand you is supposed to be light and breathable, but the moment it touches your skin, you realize breathable is a relative term. It's coarse, with the texture of a pillowcase that's been washed 100 times in river water and dried on a rock. The fabric clings slightly in the humid patches of air and scratches in the dry ones, as if determined to irritate you in every climate simultaneously. You tug it over your head, the neck hole just a little too snug, and the side seems falling unevenly over your shoulders. It's dyed a faint beige, not from any fancy plant extract, but from a lifetime of dust working its way into every fiber. Historians still argue whether average Egyptians deliberately left their linen undyed for coolness, or simply couldn't justify wasting resources on something decorative. Either way, you're discovering it's not exactly the silky, flowing robe Hollywood promised. The man who handed it to you nods in approval, which might mean you look like you belong now, or that he's just happy to see his old laundry put to use. He motions for you to follow, and you notice that his own tunic is patched at the hem and fraying under the arms. The climate might preserve mummies for millennia, but linen here lives a much harder life. As you walk, the fabric rubs against your elbows and hips, whispering against your skin with every step. It's the sort of sound you'll start ignoring soon, but right now it's just one more reminder that you're a guest in a place with its own definition of comfort. You think about your modern clothes, stretch fabrics, moisture-wicking shirts, and for a fleeting moment, you imagine wearing gym shorts here. The fantasy ends when you remember the sun would roast your legs like kebabs. A tea-leased linen covers most of you. People here learned long ago that the sun isn't just unpleasant, it's dangerous. They might not talk about UV rays, but they know what happens if you work bare-skinned under this light day after day. Wrinkles come early, burns even earlier. Some even rub mineral dust or oil on exposed skin, which might not smell great but works well enough. Passing through a narrow alley, you brush against another person's sleeve and feel how much softer theirs is. You glance down a finer weave, maybe from a higher status household. Linen wasn't just practical here. It was a status marker. The finer the thread, the more hands it passed through in spinning and weaving, and the more silver rings it cost. Yours? Let's just say it probably came straight from the affordable stall in the market. There's a faint smell coming off the tunic, too. Not unpleasant, but earthy, with traces of smoke from where it's been dried over a small fire. You get the sense laundry day here is as much about smoke as soap. The locals don't wrinkle their noses. To them, this is the clean smell. To you, it's going to take some getting used to. Your guide points to a small polished shard of bronze propped up on a windowsill, today's mirror technology. You catch your reflection and can't help but laugh quietly. The tunic hangs unevenly, your hair's already sticking to your forehead, and your modern face looks like someone who's been downgraded from time tourist to extra in the background of a historical drama. Still, there's something grounding about wearing the same thing everyone else does. It makes the heat feel shared, the dust less like it's targeting you personally. You start walking again, the scratch of linen against your skin slowly fading into the background noise of this ancient, unrelenting day. Breakfast turns out to be less Instagram-worthy food spread, and more chew until your jaw regrets it. A man at a low table gestures you over and breaks a piece off a round, flat loaf, hard, dense, and just slightly darker around the edges where it's been baked on a clay griddle. You take it, noticing the surface is rough enough to snag your fingertips. The first bite is a revelation, but not the good kind. The bread is dry, crumbly, and somehow both chewy and gritty. You chew, and then chew some more, waiting for your saliva to catch up. You've read about this before. The flour here often contains tiny bits of sand and stone from the grinding process. Over years, it wears down teeth like slow-motion sandpaper. Historians still argue whether that's why so many ancient Egyptian skeletons show extreme tooth wear or whether diet alone explains it. But as you work through your first mouthful, you're inclined to believe the sand theory. A small dish of what looks like mashed beans is passed to you. You scoop some onto your bread and take another bite. It's salty, earthy, and vaguely nutty, which helps soften the blow of the bread's texture. The man across from you is eating with the ease of someone who's done this every morning of his life. He grins at you, probably sensing your modern palate flinching. There's also a small cup of beer, though beer is a generous term. This one's thick, almost porridge-like, with visible flecks of grain floating in it. It's sour, yeasty, and surprisingly filling. In fact, for many people here, this is the main calorie source of the day. It's liquid bread, a safe-ish drink when water is unpredictable, and it gets you through hours of physical labor. You try to appreciate it, but your taste buds are staging a protest. As you work through the meal, you notice a group of children tearing into their bread without hesitation. No butter, no jam, just plain. They laugh and chatter between mouthfuls, the sound of their voices mixing with the distant bray of a donkey. This is normal to them. You're the only one here silently missing toast with peanut butter or a hot plate of eggs. Halfway through your loaf, your jaw starts to ache. You realize you've been subconsciously shifting the bread to the less sensitive side of your mouth, as if that will make it easier. It doesn't. By the time you finish, your teeth feel like they've been lightly sandblasted, and your stomach is already making the cautious gurgle of something unfamiliar arriving. The man who shared his bread with you slaps you on the shoulder with a grin, clearly pleased you didn't quit halfway. He says something you don't understand, but that sounds approving, and then points toward the market road. Breakfast is over. Energy intake complete. Time to move. You dust the crumbs from your tunic, though most of them just settle into the folds of the fabric, joining the desert dust already there. As you stand, the beer's warmth lingers in your belly, and for a moment, you can almost pretend you're ready for whatever this day will bring. You barely stepped away from the breakfast table when the sun makes it clear who's in charge here. It's not noon, not even close, but the light is already sharper, more direct. It's the kind of sun that doesn't just shine on you. It feels like it's looking through you, the way an X-ray might, except hotter at teeth first. You think maybe it's just your imagination. But as you walk, you notice the way the shadows are shrinking under people's feet, curling tighter with every passing minute. The air feels heavier now, and each breath carries a faint metallic tang. The grit from earlier has settled, but the heat is starting to rise from the packed earth in visible shimmers. The man passes carrying a basket of figs, his head wrapped in a strip of linen that covers his neck. You're tempted to ask for one, but his pace is brisk, and you're too busy wiping the sweat already forming at your temples. Historians still argue whether mornings were truly cool here by ancient standards, or if that was just optimistic writing by people who had no other frame of reference. Standing here, you bet on the latter. Every surface seems to reflect light. The mud brick walls around you glow a muted gold, throwing the sun back into your eyes no matter which way you turn. Even the air feels brighter, as though dust particles are catching the light and scattering it in every direction. You spot a group of workers heading toward the fields, carrying hoes and baskets. They walk in a loose line, talking casually, but you can see the sheen of sweat already on their arms. Not one of them slows down. Their pace is steady, almost rehearsed. This is the rhythm of survival. Move before it gets unbearable, work while you can, then find shade when the air starts to burn. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays, followed by the clinking of ceramic jars. A boy trots past carrying two of them on a pole balanced over his shoulders. The smell of something pungent drifts in his wake, probably fish sauce or fermented grain mash. You're suddenly aware that the sun is making everything smell stronger. The bread dust on your fingers, the linen on your back, the faint sweetness of rotting fruit from a nearby stall. The heat is now pressing down like a weighted blanket. Not the comforting kind, but the sort that makes you feel pinned in place. Your skin prickles, not from a breeze, but from the way sweat evaporates instantly here, leaving you dry and somehow still thirsty. You pass a woman crouched beside a jar, ladling water into a smaller pot. She's wearing a loose head covering, and you realize it's less about fashion and more about keeping the sun off her face. She glances up at you for a moment, her eyes narrowing, not unkindly, but in that way people look at tourists who clearly didn't prepare for the weather. Somewhere beyond the market road, the sound of drums starts up, slow, steady, and far away. You can't see who's playing, but the beat feels like it's syncing with your own pulse. It's hypnotic, almost enough to make you forget the heat for a second. Almost, then you catch sight of a man holding a polished bronze mirror under his chin, trying to catch the best light as he shaves with a sharp bronze blade. You wonder if he's aware he's doing this under the kind of sun that could set fire to paper. But maybe that's the point. Less sweat pooling, quicker work, to be why the time you reach the edge of the market, you're already considering finding the nearest patch of shade and refusing to move until sunset. But the day here doesn't slow for you, and the sun certainly won't. It's only getting started. Samples they haven't paid for yet. A boy reaches for a fig from a pyramid-shaped display, and the vendor raps his knuckles with a stick, fast enough to startle, gentle enough not to bruise. The boy grins and runs off, probably plotting his next attempt 2 stalls down. There's music here too, though it's not the kind you'd call background. A man with a double reed flute sits under a shade awning, his fingers moving quickly as he plays a tune that skips between sharp, bright notes and low, throaty hums. Every so often, he breaks the sip from a jug and nod at passers-by. A few children are dancing nearby, their bare feet kicking up little puffs of dust. The sensory overload is starting to blend into a kind of rhythm. The spice smells layer over the fish smells. The chatter overlaps with the laughter, and the heat presses down like it's part of the market itself. You realize this is more than just a place to buy things. It's the heartbeat of the community. Here, news travels faster than the river. Someone brushes past you, and you feel the soft clink of something against your arm. You glance down, small copper rings on a woven cord, dangling from a pouch at their waist. Coins, yes, but not the minted discs, you know. These are irregular, handmade, the kind of currency that would also pass as jewelry if needed. The person doesn't slow, just calls out to a vendor and starts inspecting pottery. You stop at a stall where woven baskets are piled high. Different shapes, different reeds, some dyed in faint stripes of ochre or faded blue. The vendor, a tall man with arms roped in muscle, hands you one without a word. It's light, almost weightless, but the weave is so tight you couldn't fit a grain of barley through it. You wonder how long it took to make, and whether anyone here ever throws one away, or if every broken handle becomes another thing to mend. A sudden breeze shifts the air, and for a blissful moment, you're sure it's cooler, until it carries a wave of something sharper, fermented fish paste. You look up just in time to see a woman untie a jar, scoop a dark, oily lump into a palm-sized leaf, and hand it to a customer. He beams, hands over a coin, and takes a big bite. You blink, trying to process the enthusiasm. Then you remember, taste here isn't just flavor, it's preservation. Salt, fermentation, and spice keep food safe, and people grow up loving what keeps them alive. You can't fault them for it, even if you're not about to try it right now. As you edge deeper into the market, the voices grow louder, the calls of vendors weaving into an unbroken wave of sound. Somewhere a donkey snorts. Somewhere else, a clay jar topples and shatters, sending a puff of fine grain into the air. And all the while, the sun burns overhead, turning the reed mats into glowing amber sheets. It's chaotic. It's dusty. It's loud. And somehow it's beautiful. You finally stop at a stall where brightly painted scarabs are laid out on a reed mat, their glossy shells catching the light like tiny jewels. The vendor, a wiry man with a shaved head, flashes a grin and launches into rapid-fire words you don't understand. He picks one up, presses it into your palm, and gestures to a string of beads hanging overhead. You gather he wants you to buy, but his hands move so quickly you're not sure if he's offering a necklace, a blessing, or maybe both. You try the universal language of shrugging and pointing, which earns you a raised eyebrow. Then, inspired by every bad movie scene you've ever seen, you trace a few pretend hieroglyphics in the air, as if to ask, how much? The vendor blinks at you, then bursts out laughing so hard he nearly tips over his MAT. LIT turns out haggling here isn't just business, it's performance. People at the next stall glance over, smiling, clearly enjoying the show of the clueless stranger negotiating with invisible symbols. A woman selling onions even calls out what sounds like advice, though it might just be her telling you to give up and pay whatever he's asking. Historians still argue whether average Egyptians actually read the hieroglyphics used in everyday life, or if most relied on simplified scripts while the priests and scribes kept the fancy symbols to themselves. Judging by your attempt, you're firmly in the outsider with no clue category. The vendor finally waves his hand dismissively and pushes the scarab back toward you. Maybe it's a gift, maybe it's a pity sale. Either way, you take it. The scarab feels cool in your palm, carved from something greenish, maybe glazed faience, maybe stone. You flip it over and see tiny markings etched on the bottom. They could mean anything from good luck to property of the onion seller. For all you know, you just accepted a receipt for 3 goats. You reach for a small copper ring at the bottom of your tunic pocket, one you've been given earlier with the bread. You hold it out hesitantly. The vendor snatches it with surprising speed, nods once, and pockets it. Then he shouts a single word across the market. Other vendors chuckle. You're not sure, but you suspect you've just been given the honorary title of easy customer. Still, there's a friendliness in the air. No one's mocking you cruelly. They're entertained. You're part of their morning amusement. The foreigner who thought drawing hieroglyphics in midair would pass for trade. You can live with that. As you tuck the scarab into the fold of your tunic, you notice the vendor has already turned his attention to the next buyer. Business resumes as usual. You've left your mark on the market, though not nearly as much as the market has left on you. You're barely done pocketing your questionable scarab when a man in a white linen kilt waves you toward a broad stone staircase. He gestures upward, his other hand clutching a bundle of incense sticks. The smell already drifts down, sweet, resinous, thick enough that even out here in the open air, it curls into your nose and lingers. You climb, sandals slapping against sun-warmed steps, until you reach the courtyard of a temple. The walls rise high, covered in painted carvings that look impossibly crisp despite being centuries old. Reds, blues, and gold shimmer where the morning light hits them, and for a second, you forget your thirst, your itchy tunic, even your aching jaw from breakfast. This place demands your attention, and it knows it. The stone beneath your bare feet is hot, but you're not allowed sandals inside. You shuffle forward, feeling the sting of the heat seep into your soles. Around you, others do the same without flinching. They're used to it. You, however, are doing a convincing impression of someone walking across a stovetop. Inside, the air shifts. It's cooler here, not because of some ancient air conditioning, but because the walls are so thick the sun can't force its way in. The incense smoke hangs in visible threads, rising from tall brass burners. You inhale, and it clings to the back of your throat, sweet but heavy. The priest approaches, head shaved, linen pure and spotless in a way yours definitely isn't anymore. He raises a hand in greeting, then traces a quick symbol in the air with his incense stick. You bow slightly, trying to mimic the others. He nods, apparently satisfied, and motions you to follow the line of worshippers. You stand in place as they murmur prayers, bowing at the feet of a towering statue whose gaze seems fixed far above your head. It's impossible not to feel small here. The god looms in painted stone, eternal, while you're just a sweaty outsider trying not to cough from the incense. Historians still argue whether temple visits were daily obligations for most Egyptians or more occasional affairs, but judging by the turnout here, faith weaves through everyday life as tightly as linen through a loom. You can feel it in the air, not just smoke, but reverence, expectation, something weightier than heat or hunger. When it's your turn to step forward, you hesitate. Everyone else presses their forehead briefly against the base of the statue before backing away. You lean in, the stone cool against your skin, and for one surreal moment, you're aware of every sound, the faint hum of chanting, the crackle of incense embers, even your own pulse. Then it's over. The priest taps your shoulder lightly with a bundle of palm leaves, murmurs something you don't understand, and gestures you toward the exit. You shuffle back into the sunlight, blinking against the sudden brightness. The stone under your feet burns hotter than before, but your mind lingers on the coolness inside, the sense that you just stepped into another world, one that isn't yours and never will be. Stepping back into the open, you squint as the sunlight rebounds off whitewashed walls and sand. The temple behind you looms like a carved mountain, but the world outside is noisier, messier, far more alive. You follow a cluster of townsfolk down a side street where the sound shifts from chanting to chatter, from incense to something earthier, animal pens. The street narrows, hemmed in by mud brick houses whose upper stories jut out over your head, casting patches of shade you're grateful for. Ahead, a braying donkey announces itself, tugging against a rope as its owner coaxes it toward a wooden trough. Goats bleat from a small enclosure. Chickens scatter across the road like feathery marbles, and somewhere out of sight, a cow lowing carries through the heat. It's not just livestock. You catch glimpses of pets, too. A boy chasing after a monkey wearing what looks like a string harness, a woman with a sleek desert cat winding around her legs as she carries a jug of water. You think back to those tomb paintings you've seen. Turns out they weren't exaggerating. Egyptians really did love their animals. The smell is, frankly, a lot. straw, manure, and sweat mix into a cocktail that could knock you flat if the sun hasn't already. You wrinkle your nose, which earns you a laugh from a passing shepherd balancing a basket of pigeon eggs on his shoulder. He mutters something you can't understand but pats his stomach and winks, as if to say, "Smells bad, tastes good." Historians still argue whether pigeons were a common staple or more of a delicacy for the wealthy, but seeing a whole basket of their eggs here makes you suspect plenty of bellies were filled by them. And the sheep and goats? Their wool and milk kept families alive. One man motions toward you, holding out a clay pot filled with something white and soft. You realize it's cheese, crumbly, tangy, probably made just yesterday. He offers a taste, and you try it. It's salty, sharper than modern cheese, but surprisingly refreshing in heat. Of course, your stomach, already unsettled by gritty bread and questionable water, grumbles in protest. You politely hand it back before you cause an international incident. You notice something else. Animals aren't just food or pets here. They're tied to belief. A small shrine built into a corner wall shows carvings of a cow-headed goddess, Hathor, her image decorated with fresh flowers and a dab of red paint. Someone's left a bowl of grain at her feet, offerings for divine favor, tucked right into the neighborhood. You wipe your brow, glancing at the dusty path that winds deeper into the residential quarter. The chatter of animals fades a little, replaced by children's voices echoing between the walls. Life pulses here in layers, sacred, practical, playful, all tangled together. And every step you take reminds you that surviving this world means learning its rhythms fast, or being trampled underfoot like one of those wandering chickens. The narrow lane draws you further, and soon you're surrounded by the everyday pulse of a neighborhood. The houses here rise 2, sometimes even 3 stories, their mud brick walls washed in faded white plaster. Wooden shutters hang half open, letting warm air drift out along with the smells of cooking barley and stewing vegetables. It's a maze of walls and alleys, punctuated by the occasional palm tree bending overhead, its fronds wagging lazily in the breeze. Children dash around you, shrieking with laughter, their shaved heads gleaming with sweat except for the one little lock of hair left dangling at the side, a style you've seen in ancient art but never thought you'd actually see in motion. They kick around a ball of tied rags, weaving between your legs without apology. A woman pokes her head out of a doorway and yells something sharp at them, her tone universal, the same tired cadence of every mother since time began. Inside one open doorway, you glimpse a family seated cross-legged on woven mats. A pot simmers in the middle, steam fogging the air as they scoop thick porridge with bits of bread. The father gestures animatedly, telling a story, while the mother rolls her eyes, the children giggling at the familiar routine. Domestic life in ancient Egypt looks suspiciously like domestic life anywhere. Then comes the hum, a rhythmic grinding sound, steady as a heartbeat. You're on a corner and see 2 women kneeling over a saddle quern, their hands moving back and forth to crush grain into flour. The dust rises in little golden clouds, sticking to their forearms, their linen dresses powdered with it. They don't pause as you pass. They're locked into a motion they've repeated thousands of times. The very sound of survival. Historians still argue whether Egyptian homes were primarily private retreats or open community hubs, but walking here, you sense they're both. The doorways open easily. Voices spill into the street. Neighbors call greetings from one rooftop to another. Privacy seems less important than belonging. One man lounging on a stool waves you over. He's carving a bit of wood with a bronze blade, shaving it into the shape of a small figurine. He holds it up proudly. A cat, of course, its arched back captured in quick, confident strokes. He offers it to you, and though you're not sure if it's a gift or an early version of By My Art, you nod gratefully and tuck it into your belt. The sun slants lower, shadows stretching across the alley. You catch sight of rooftops above, flat surfaces where mats and jars are spread out. Some women are up there, chattering as they hang linen to dry or check on fermenting beer jars. A breeze drifts by, carrying the smell of yeast, sharp and sour. As you move on, a thought lingers. Life here isn't glamorous, not like the temples or the painted tombs, but it's constant, enduring, intimate. If you really wanted to understand Egypt, not just its monuments, you'd have to live right here in the dust, in the grind, with the families who made up it. Heartbeat. The sound of hammering guides you out of the neighborhood. You follow it until the lane spills into a wider street alive with clatter and clang. This is the artisans' quarter, and it hums with energy. Dust motes dance in the air, stirred by 100 busy hands. each set shaping Egypt's identity one hammer blow or brushstroke at a time. A man leans over a block of limestone, his chisel biting out a shallow relief of a falcon. The rhythm is hypnotic. Tap, chip, pause, tap, chip. Stone shavings cover his lap like fallen snow. Not far away, a potter kicks at his wheel, shaping wet clay that rises obediently beneath his fingers. You watch as he pinches the rim into symmetry, then slaps it lightly, as though scolding a stubborn child. The smells here are different: chalky dust, hot metal, and a faint sweetness from pigments ground into bowls. One woman kneels over a slab, mixing red ochre into a powder, her pestles circling endlessly. Another dips a brush made of reeds into black ink, drawing careful lines on a half-finished coffin lid. The hieroglyphs are precise, flowing, almost musical in their strokes. Children dart through the quarter here too, though not for games. They carry baskets of broken pottery, scraps of wood, or bundles of reeds, apprentices in miniature, serving masters who rarely glance up. You imagine being one of them, condemned to years of fetching water and grinding pigment before you'd even be trusted with a chisel. Patience wasn't optional here, it was survival. Historians still argue whether artisans were respected as skilled craftsmen or treated as little better than laborers. The truth seems to lie somewhere in between. You catch sight of one painter joking with a passing neighbor, his hands stained permanently with lapis blue. There's pride in his eyes, but also weariness, the kind that comes from long hours bent over surfaces that belong to kings, not himself. You pause by a workshop where bronze glows in a low fire. Two men pull a mold apart, revealing a tiny statue of Anubis, sleek and gleaming. It's not perfect. One ear is crooked, but they laugh, shrug, and toss it aside like scrap. Perfection takes many tries. A T strikes you that while pyramids and temples get the glory, this quarter is the lifeblood behind them. Every god painted on a wall, every amulet slipped into a tomb, every jar buried with grain passed through hands like these. You feel the grit under your sandals, hear the echo of hammers in your skull. Think, Egypt's eternity was built one sore back and dusty breath at a time. The quarter narrows again until you're funneled toward the river. You hear it before you see it, low waves lapping against mud brick embankments, the creak of rope, the slap of oars. When you finally emerge, the Nile spreads before you like a mirror of liquid bronze, catching the late afternoon light. It's wide, calm, and endlessly moving, the true artery of Egypt. The banks are alive with activity. Men in kilts haul nets from the shallows, their catch glittering silver as it thrashes against woven cords. Children splash nearby, shrieking when one fish slips free and darts between their legs. On the far bank, tall papyrus reeds sway, their green stalks bending gracefully under the breeze. You half expect to see a heron lift off, wings flaring, and sure enough, one does. Sailing across the water with a lazy flap, a narrow boat glides by, little more than reeds bound together with twine. Two men stand inside, pushing long poles into the water to keep it steady. On deck sit baskets of grain and clay jars, cargo destined for the next village downstream. The Nile isn't just water. It's highway, supermarket, and life insurance rolled into one. Without it, the desert would swallow everything. Historians still argue whether the Nile's annual flood was seen primarily as a gift to the gods or just a predictable cycle people relied on. Looking at the river now, swollen and gleaming, you can't imagine separating the two. The water feels sacred, but also deeply practical. The fisherman waves you over and offers a sliver of his catch roasted over a clay brazier. The fish is smoky, tender, though riddled with bones. He laughs when you gag on a pin-thin one. Apparently, even locals aren't spared that frustration. Beside him, another man shapes a papyrus skiff, weaving stalks into bundles and lashing them together. He works quickly, hands practiced, the smell of green reeds sharp in your nose. You sit for a while, watching the boats drift, the river glisten, the children splash. And you realize, if you were dropped here without context, without pyramids or pharaohs or hieroglyphs, you'd still know this land was ancient. The Nile carries a weight, a permanence, that makes you feel both small and strangely safe, as though it has always flowed and always will. The sun dips lower, and with it the day's intensity softens. You follow the riverbank until the smell of baking clay catches your attention. It leads you to a cluster of low, smoky workshops, the potter's domain. Their kilns squat like beehives, round domes built from mud brick, their mouths glowing faint orange. Smoke curls lazily upward, carrying with it the scent of damp earth turning into permanence. A man squats beside a wheel, his bare foot pumping the bass in a steady rhythm. On the wheel, clay spins and rises under his palms, taking form as if alive. You can hear the faint squelch as water slicks the surface, see the concentration etched on his face. A pot takes shape, narrow neck, wide belly, and just as quickly, he slices it off with a taut string. Next lump, next vessel. No hesitation. You can tell he's done this thousands of times. Nearby, shelves are stacked with jars in every stage of life. Some gray and soft, waiting to dry. Others chalky white, waiting for fire. A few already gleam with slip, polished smooth with a pebble to give them that iconic sheen. You reach out and tap one. It rings faintly, hollow but strong. Children run errands here too, carrying armfuls of reeds to feed the fire or fetching water in heavy jars. Their laughter mixes with the crackle of burning brushwood. You catch sight of one boy carefully scratching little doodles into a discarded shard. Spirals, stick figures, maybe the earliest form of graffiti. Historians still argue whether ostraca like these were just throwaway practice or a kind of casual notepad, but looking at him, it feels exactly like the doodles kids still etch on desks today. The potters don't only make jars for beer or grain. You see incense burners shaped like lotus flowers, tiny offering cups, even small clay figurines of animals, cats, hippos, crocodiles. Some look crude, but you know someone will place them reverently in a tomb. Eternity, carried in clay. You watch one potter pull open his kiln, using a long stick to roll glowing vessels out into the cool air. They ping faintly as they settle, the sound almost like laughter. And standing there, breathing in the clay dust and smoke, you realize these people aren't just making pots. They're shaping the very containers of daily life, the silent backbone of survival. The scent of clay fades as you wander back toward the market district. The closer you get, the louder it grows, a murmur at first, then a rising chorus of voices, animals, bargaining, laughter, and clattering goods. When you step into the open square, it hits you like stepping into another world. Stalls line the edges, nothing fancy, just woven mats on the ground or wooden planks propped up on bricks. Vendors shout over one another, hawking everything from figs to copper trinkets. A woman with tired eyes holds out necklaces strung with blue faience beads, their glossy glaze catching the light. Beside her, boy balances a tray of honey cakes, the smell sweet enough to make your teeth ache. You try to imagine your debit card working here. It wouldn't. Here it's grain, beer, or copper scraps, maybe the occasional silver ring if you're wealthy. At one corner, a scribe sits cross-legged with a roll of papyrus. He's writing for a man who seems anxious, dictating what might be a letter or a debt record. Literacy is rare here. Scribes are like human USB drives, storing and copying information for everyone else. Historians still argue whether scribes enjoyed real power or were just glorified clerks, but watching the reverence with which this man treats him, you sense it leaned toward power. The market smells intense. A swirl of dried fish, garlic, sweat, and sweet wine. Donkeys bray as they shuffle past, loaded with baskets. A goat tries to chew on someone's linen hem and gets swatted away. A woman pours oil from one jar into another, the liquid thick and golden, catching the sun. You spot some quirky items too. Amulets shaped like scarabs, little jars of coal for eyeliner, even bundles of dried herbs tied neatly with reed cord. One vendor swears his crocodile fat salve cures everything from sunburn to bad dreams. You're not convinced, but someone buys it anyway. There's laughter when a thief is caught, a boy, barely older than 12, caught slipping dates into his tunic. The stall owner ruffles his hair instead of punishing him, muttering something that sounds suspiciously like, "Try harder next time." Egypt, it seems, has room for leniency alongside order. Standing in the center, you're surrounded by chaos but also community. This isn't just commerce, it's connection. Gossip flows as freely as goods. You realize that for all the towering monuments Egypt left behind, its heart beats loudest in places like this. Crowded, noisy, messy markets where daily life pulses. By the time you leave the market, the light has shifted again. Long shadows now stretch across the packed earth, and the air cools just enough to remind you that the desert still rules this land. You wander away from the noise and find yourself near a broad avenue flanked by stone columns. Carved into each one are hieroglyphs, painted once but now faded, like old graffiti weathered by time. Still, the shapes remain crisp: falcons, eyes, zigzags of water. They almost seem to wink as you pass. This is the temple district. Unlike the market, the energy here is hushed, restrained, yet still buzzing with a kind of anticipation. Priests move deliberately through the courtyards, shaved heads glinting in the fading light, linen robes spotless. Their hands carry censers, swinging small clouds of incense that drift on the breeze, wrapping everything in a faint, resinous sweetness. The temple itself rises massive before you. Its pylon gate looms like a stone mountain, walls etched with scenes of gods smiting enemies or blessing the harvest. Historians still argue whether these carvings were propaganda or pure devotion, but as you crane your neck to see them, you suspect they were both. The gods were present here, but so was the pharaoh's power. You shuffle along with a small crowd of locals waiting at the steps. They bow low before entering, whispering short prayers. The ground is cool under your feet as you step inside. Light filters only where priests allow it, shafts of sun from narrow openings high above. Everywhere else, shadows pool like ink. Statues line the halls, towering falcons, jackal-headed guardians, and human figures frozen in postures of offering. You notice offerings scattered at their feet, bowls of bread, flowers, jars of beer. Some already stale, but their purpose isn't freshness, it's devotion. A woman presses a lotus into the hand of a priest and murmurs the name of her sick child. He nods gravely, as if placing her request directly into the god's inbox. In the sanctuary, the air thickens. Musicians play delicate notes on harps and sistrums, their rhythms hypnotic, looping, enough to lull even a restless mind. The god's statue, small compared to the outer grandeur, sits hidden in a shrine. Only priests may approach it, but even standing far back, you feel its weight. Whether psychological, divine, or both, you can't tell. The temple smells of incense and stone dust. Your ears ring with chant and rattle. You think of the farmer you saw with his basket of onions earlier. He'll likely be back here, offering some of his harvest to ensure the Nile floods again. And suddenly you realize the temple isn't separate from daily life. It is daily life, just focused through smoke, stone, and song. Section 17. The longer you linger in the temple, the more you realize how carefully choreographed it all is. Priests glide silently like well-trained stagehands, their movements timed to the rhythm of chants. Even the ringing of the sistrum, a kind of rattling instrument shaped like a horseshoe, is deliberate, each note meant to soothe the gods, or maybe to remind the congregation of who's in charge. But the real showstopper is the ritual at dusk. As the last sunlight slips down the walls, a group of priests brings out small oil lamps. They light them one by one until the whole space flickers like it's breathing. Shadows leap across the carved reliefs, making gods and kings appear alive, striding across the stone. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian truly believed these gods dwelled here, in physical form, or whether the spectacle was more symbolic. Watching the scene, though, it's hard not to feel the weight of something larger than yourself. Curious detail catches your eye. One priest is sprinkling water, not from the Nile, but from a small alabaster jar. That's because temple water comes from sacred lakes, artificial basins dug beside the complex, kept pure by ritual cleansing. Egyptians believed the gods deserved the cleanest, most perfect version of everything, whether it was bread, water, or incense. Meanwhile, you remember drinking the Nile's muddy brew earlier and suddenly feel very underqualified to approach the shrine. You glance at a painted ceiling overhead, speckled with golden stars on a blue background. It's like lying on your back at night, staring at the Milky Way. A reminder that the temple wasn't just an earthly address, it was meant as a microcosm of the universe. Every wall, every pillar, every corridor represented order over chaos. Someone brushes past you, a young boy carrying a basket of lotus blossoms to lay at the statue's feet. The petals glow faintly in the lamplight, their perfume cutting through the heavy incense. It's such a fragile gift in such a massive place. But maybe that's the point. The priest catches your eye, not with suspicion, but with something like gentle amusement. He gestures toward the door, as if reminding you that outsiders don't linger here too long. You bow awkwardly and step back into the cool evening air. The sound of the market has faded, replaced by crickets and the low coo of pigeons roosting in temple walls. The contrast is striking. Chaos outside, order inside. Egypt seems to thrive by balancing the two. Outside the temple walls, the night has fully arrived. Torches flicker along the avenue, there's smoke curling into the deep indigo sky. The temperature finally dips, the day's furnace giving way to a desert chill that slides under your skin. You pull your linen tighter, though it's barely enough. Egyptians, of course, are used to this rhythm. Roasting sun by day, cool breath of the desert by night. You, however, feel like you've run a marathon while wearing a damp bedsheet. The streets are quieter now, but not empty. Families cluster in front of their mud brick homes, talking, eating, sharing bread, or simply watching the stars. Children chase each other barefoot, their laughter echoing down narrow alleys. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays, sounding exactly like an old hinge protesting in the night. You pass a small gathering where a man is telling stories. His voice rises and falls in practiced cadences, holding his audience as firmly as a rope. From the fragments you catch, it's about a clever peasant who outwits a greedy official. Egyptians loved stories like this. Tricksters, heroes, divine interventions that reminded them the world wasn't all taxes and toil. Historians still argue whether oral tales like these influenced the written literature we have today, or if the written text stood apart. Either way, you're struck by how much of life is spent in listening, not rushing. Time itself seems slower here. You notice something else: stars. Millions of them, sharp and cold above the Nile. The Milky Way stretches like a river of light, mirroring the black water below. To Egyptians, the sky wasn't just decoration. It was Nut, the goddess of the heavens, swallowing the sun each night and birthing it again at dawn. A neat cosmic recycling program with no waste. As you lean against a wall to rest, the city hum softens into something like a lullaby. Distant chatter, a reed flute playing lazily, the rhythmic splash of oars on the Nile. Your body feels heavy, every muscle tugging you towards sleep. Still, you can't quite close your eyes. There's too many scents, sounds, sights you've never known before. A boy runs past with a clay lamp balanced in his hand, its flame trembling but never going out. You watch it vanish into the night, tiny star carried through dusty streets. It strikes you that in a place this old, your presence is less than a flicker. And yet, for this moment, you're here, tired, overwhelmed, but alive in ancient Egypt, trying desperately not to nod off on a stranger's doorstep. The Nile at night is a different creature entirely. You wander toward its banks, drawn by the faint slap of water against wooden hulls. Boats sit tethered like sleeping animals, their sails furled, their shadows long and skeletal under the moon. The air smells damp and metallic, like wet reeds and old rope. Cool mist rises off the surface, kissing your face with a welcome chill. Fisherman squats near the waterline, untangling nets by torchlight. His hands move deftly, almost without looking, as if the knots undo themselves. He glances at you but doesn't pause. He has work that doesn't care if you're lost or curious. You hear the occasional splash as fish stir below. The Nile has been feeding Egyptians for thousands of years, and tonight it whispers with the same promise. Across the river, you spot the glimmer of temple pylons in the distance, their tops faintly illuminated by moonlight. The reflection wavers on the water, turning stone into liquid. Somewhere upriver, a chorus of frogs begins, loud and insistent, a sound the ancients once took as proof that life and fertility returned with each inundation. Historians still argue whether frogs themselves were deliberately protected in temples or if they simply thrived because of water management, but the symbolism was obvious. Frogs meant rebirth, and here they sing like tiny green priests. You sit on a smooth stone and let your feet dangle into the cool current. It tugs gently, insistently, like a giant reminding you who's really in charge. The Nile is no backdrop. It is Egypt itself. Without it, the land is just desert. With it, civilization blooms. Small reed boat drifts past, paddled silently by two boys carrying jars of beer. Their silhouettes look like shadows gliding over glass. One of them notices you and grins, raising a hand in greeting before they vanish into darkness. For a moment, you feel as though you've slipped sideways into a dream. time itself wobbling like the water's surface. Mosquito buzzes near your ear, snapping you back. Of course, sleep by the riverbank and you be covered in bites, maybe worse. Malaria is a very real risk, even if the Egyptians didn't yet know the cause. They burned herbs, wore amulets, prayed to gods, but none of that would help you survive the swarm. You slap at the air uselessly, deciding maybe stargazing from a slightly higher ground is the better option. You climb the embankment and sit in the sand, watching the river glide on, eternal, indifferent. The stars shimmer above, the frogs drone below, and your own heartbeat slows to match the Nile's rhythm. It feels like the world is rocking you, gently, into drowsiness. Morning finds you once again, though you're not sure if you ever truly slept. The Nile's song has a way of lulling you into half-dreams, and when the first streaks of sunlight break across the horizon, your eyes sting with fatigue. The air is cool for now, but you know what's coming? The blast furnace of midday. Egyptians rise early for a reason, and you're about to remember why. As you wander back into the settlement, you hear the first crack of wooden doors opening. Women emerge with baskets balanced on their heads, heading toward the river to fetch water. Children trail behind them, still yawning, clutching small jars like miniature versions of their mothers. The sound of grinding begins again, the daily drone of stone against stone, crushing grain into meal. It's like the heartbeat of the town, steady and endless, as a group of men shuffle past you carrying hoes and flint-tipped plows. They're heading to the fields before the sun rises too high. Farming in Egypt wasn't just a job, it was survival. Every planting season, every harvest, tied directly to the Nile's moods. One bad flood, and the people suffered. Historians still argue whether priests exaggerated the predictability of the Nile's cycles to reinforce their authority, but from the farmer's perspective, it must have felt like gambling with the gods every single year. You catch a glimpse of oxen being let out of a pen, their horns painted with red ochre. The animals snort clouds into the morning air, reluctant but obedient. Farmers prod them toward the fields where furrows wait like scars in the earth. Soon enough, seed will scatter, dust will rise, and sweat will roll. A boy not much older than 12 pauses to stare at you. His bare feet are caked with mud, and he clutches a bundle of reeds. He offers one, wordlessly. When you take it, he grins before darting away, leaving you with a green stalk and the faint sense that you've just been initiated into something ancient and ordinary. And here's the kicker, you wouldn't last an hour in their sandals. These people bend, dig, sow, haul water, swat bugs, and repeat, all under the merciless sun. No ergonomic chairs, no 8-hour shifts. You'd be begging for shade by mid-morning. Yet for them, it's life as usual, passed down in calloused hands for generations. The sound of a conch horn carries from the river, announcing the start of irrigation. Men swing wide shafts, those long wooden poles with buckets dangling from one end, counterweights on the other. They dip, lift, and pour with a rhythm that's hypnotic but brutally physical. You imagine doing that for hours, day after day. No gym membership could prepare you, and still there's laughter. You hear it cutting through the grind, carried on the breeze. Even in the exhaustion of dawn, someone makes a joke, and another snorts with mirth. Life here is hard, no doubt, but it's also strangely resilient. The sun creeps higher, and already the heat bites at your skin. You pull the reed stalk through your fingers, its surface cool and wet, and wonder how long you can keep up with Egypt before Egypt keeps you down. By midday, the Egyptian sun has transformed from warm companion to merciless overseer. It presses down on you like a heavy hand, squeezing sweat from your skin before you've even lifted a finger. The villagers don't complain, they just adjust. Wide straw hats, linen wraps, the occasional dip of water poured over the head. They move with the weary grace of people who know exactly how long a body can endure before it collapses. You drift toward the edges of the fields where farmers bend low, scattering seed into shallow furrows. The soil is dark and rich, a gift from the last inundation, and every handful cast is a gamble for survival. Someone chants a steady rhythm to keep the sowing in sync, and soon the whole group hums along. The tune is simple but hypnotic, almost like a lullaby carried by the wind. A man pauses to wipe his brow, smearing dust into the sweat streaking his face. He catches you staring and shrugs, as if to say, "What else can we do?" He goes back to work without another word. And you, feeling somewhat guilty for standing idle, try bending down to mimic their motions. It takes all of 2 minutes before your back protests, your knees complain, and you're convinced these people have spines made of granite. Theo survived midday here. Egyptians built a rhythm into their lives. Hard labor early, brief pauses in shade, then back at it until the lights softened. It wasn't laziness. It was survival strategy. Even temples acknowledge this cycle. Wall paintings often show workers lounging under trees or sipping from jugs, proof that rest wasn't sinful but necessary. Historians still argue whether these depictions were idealized propaganda or real glimpses into peasant life. But either way, the message is clear. You cannot fight the sun. In the distance, you see women gathered under a simple awning of reeds, weaving mats while gossiping quietly. Their fingers flick and knot reeds so quickly that it looks effortless. A baby naps beside them in a woven cradle, shaded by nothing more than a palm frond stuck upright in the sand. Somehow it works. The smell of baked bread wafts from a mud brick oven, carried across the fields. Your stomach growls, though you know that meal is already promised to the workers who need it more than you. Egyptian bread was thick, gritty with stone-ground flour, and often flavored with herbs. Not exactly the kind of soft sourdough you're used to, but filling. And filling is all that matters when the day stretches endlessly ahead. A hawk circles overhead, casting a brief shadow as it hunts. For a fleeting second, you feel like the falcon-eyed god Horus himself is watching. Maybe he is. Or maybe it's just a bird searching for lunch. Either way, it breaks the monotony of heat and sweat. You find yourself staggering toward a scrap of shade cast by a crumbling wall. The workers notice, but no one laughs. They've seen outsiders wilt before. Instead, one farmer tosses you a clay jar of water. The liquid tastes faintly of silt, but right now it might as well be ambrosia. The truth hits you hard. You would not survive a single Egyptian summer. Not without lungs full of dust, a back bent in half, and skin burned crisp. And yet, for them, this was simply the heartbeat of life. As the afternoon drags on, the sun begins to tilt toward the west, but the heat lingers like a stubborn guest refusing to leave. The villagers know this rhythm well. They don't expect relief until the light softens into gold. Still, the work goes on, quieter now, slower, almost like everyone has slipped into a trance just to endure the worst of it. You drift with them, following the shuffle of bare feet across the packed soil. One farmer shows you how to scatter seed properly, letting it fall in a light, even rain from the palm of his hand. Too clumped, and the crop strangles itself. Too sparse, and the harvest won't fill the granaries. It looks deceptively simple, but when you try it, the grain either spills in a heap or blows away in the hot wind. The farmer laughs softly, not unkindly. For him, this is muscle memory, passed down through generations. For you, it's like trying to juggle sand. A pair of boys run past carrying bundles of reeds. They've been ordered to patch the edges of a canal where water seeps out into the dust. Irrigation is as critical as sowing. Without water, the black earth dries to useless crust. The boys jab the reeds into cracks, wedge mud around them, and splash more water to seal it all tight. One of them grins as mud splatters his face. You can't help but think of modern kids groaning about chores, but here, childhood comes with responsibility measured in gallons of river water. Off to the side, you see a small shrine decorated with pebbles and scraps of cloth. Farmers pause briefly to bow their heads before it. The offering is humble, but the meaning is clear. Farming isn't just labor, it's a conversation with the divine. Historians still argue whether every small shrine like this was dedicated to a major god, Osiris, Hathor, or Hapi, the spirit of the Nile, or whether they were simply folk traditions that never made it into the grand temples. Either way, you sense how tightly belief is woven into survival. Your stomach growls again as baskets of bread and onions make their way into the fields. Workers squat in the dust, tearing rough loaves into chunks, dipping them into small jars of salty paste. Someone hands you a piece, and though it tastes gritty, like chewing on sandpaper, the onion's bite cuts through. The meal is humble, but strangely satisfying. You remember the lavish banquets painted on tomb walls and wonder if those were ever real for ordinary people, or just a fantasy etched for eternity. A donkey brays nearby, tugging stubbornly at its rope as a boy tries to coax it forward with a bundle of hay. The scene feels timeless, beast against boy, neither willing to give in easily. The donkey wins, at least for now, collapsing in the dust with an air of smugness that transcends centuries. The afternoon air ripples, and for a moment you see mirages of water shimmering in the distance. You know it's only the heat, but it's easy to imagine why Egyptians filled their myths with visions of endless rivers and hidden lakes in the afterlife. In a land where water is life, even an illusion feels sacred. Be by the time the light finally softens, the farmer's shoulders sag and their pace slows. Work hasn't ended, but the hardest stretch is over. A kind of collective exhale spreads across the fields. For you, it's survival. For them, it's just another day ticked off the endless cycle of flood, sow, and harvest. And as you sit there in the dusty shade, breadcrumbs still on your lips, you realize this was their whole world. You've barely lasted half a day, and already your body aches. Yet for them, this rhythm carried the weight of millennia. As the sun finally dips lower, the air shifts from brutal to merely stifling. Like a heavy blanket you can almost kick aside. Shadows stretch across the ground, and the Nile gleams faintly in the distance, its surface catching every streak of gold. For Egyptians, this is the most forgiving part of the day, the hour when work slows, animals are herded back, and people begin to think of hearths, families, and whatever passes for dinner. You trail along the dusty track with the workers as they leave the fields. Their steps are slow, but not weary in the way yours are. Their muscles, used to years of labor, seem to carry memory of every path and every task. Your legs, however, feel like they're made of papyrus reeds ready to snap. One of the farmers pats your shoulder with a grin that somehow says, "You'll toughen up or you'll die first." Comforting. Children dart ahead, their voices carrying high and bright, chasing each other with sticks that are supposed to be spears. A woman calls after them, balancing a wide jar of water on her head with the kind of grace you couldn't manage even with years of practice. The jar doesn't wobble an inch. You imagine yourself attempting the same feat. Cue the sound of clay shattering and someone scolding you for wasting good water. As the houses of mud brick come into view, a light haze of smoke rises from ovens. The village smells like earth, ash, and bread, with just a faint sourness of beer brewing somewhere nearby. Egyptians drank beer more than water. It was safer, filling, and full of calories for labor. Modern visitors often expect something refined. In truth, it was cloudy, thick, and probably closer to liquid bread. Historians still argue whether the daily brew made people pleasantly tipsy or whether the low alcohol meant it was just thirst-quenching fuel. Either way, after today, you're ready to drink it by the jugful. You squeeze inside a cramped courtyard where families cluster together. There's no private dining here. Everyone sits cross-legged, bowls passed around, each person tearing off bread or scooping onions, beans, or lentil stew. Occasionally there's fish, salted and dried, but meat is rare and reserved for festivals. You notice how careful they are with portions, not wasteful, but not stingy either. Food is community. Hunger is shared, so fullness must be too. You chew another gritty mouthful of bread, feeling the sand between your teeth, and someone offers you a sip of beer from a clay mug. It's warm, sour, and frankly, not something you'd order at a modern bar. But after a day in the fields, it's bliss. You almost forget how tired you are, until your body reminds you with a deep ache settling into every joint. In the corner, an elder begins telling a story, voice low and steady, while children cluster around him. He speaks of crocodile god who lurks in the river, waiting to snap at the careless. The children squeal and laugh, half afraid, half delighted. You lean back, eyes heavy, listening to the cadence. This is how knowledge survives, passed mouth to ear, night after night. Was it myth? Was it cautionary tale? Historians still argue whether stories of river monsters were literal warnings or symbolic teachings. Either way, you won't be dangling your toes in the Nile anytime soon. The stars begin to prick through the fading sky. Without city lights, the heavens blaze, sharp and endless. You hear a boy whisper, "That's Osiris," pointing at Orion's belt. The connection is so natural, so immediate, you can't help but feel small under it all. The night air cools at last, and people drift toward their sleeping mats. Families huddle together, dogs curl at doorways, and the village exhales into quiet. You find your own spot, shifting uneasily on woven reeds. The air carries the faint hum of insects and the distant rush of the river. Tomorrow will be the same, but for tonight, you let your eyes close under a sky older than memory. Sleep doesn't last long in ancient Egypt, not with the kind of bed you've been given. It's a simple woven mat, reeds creaking under your weight, every lump and strand pressing into your back. Pillows? Forget feathers, you get a carved wooden headrest that feels more like a prop from a chiropractor's nightmare. The Egyptians swore by it, claiming it kept your head cool and safe from scorpions. You, on the other hand, are convinced it's just a plot to keep chiropractors in business. The night is cooler, yes, but not quiet. From somewhere nearby, a donkey brays like it's auditioning for the role of world's loudest alarm clock. Dogs bark, insects hum, and the occasional human coughs or laughs in the darkness. Villages didn't sleep in silence. They slept in layers of sound, with life never fully shutting down. Even the Nile seems to whisper, its waters lapping faintly against the banks, like an eternal lullaby. You roll to your side and catch glimpses of stars through gaps in the roof beams. Egyptians charted their calendars by those same constellations, relying on the rising of Sirius, the dog star, to predict the Nile flood. When it appeared just before dawn, people knew the river was on its way to swell and bless the fields. Historians still argue whether common villagers tracked Sirius themselves or whether priests alone guarded that sacred knowledge. But either way, the heavens above were not just decoration. They were survival. At some point, you drift into shallow, restless sleep, only to be stirred awake by the sound of footsteps outside. A man shuffles by, carrying a torch. Night patrol. Even in the dark, there was work to be done. Watching for thieves, keeping an eye out for wandering animals, making sure fires didn't spread. Imagine being the guy whose shift was wander around in the pitch black, hoping not to trip into a crocodile. Sweet dreams, indeed. And then there are the dreams themselves. Egyptians took them seriously, sometimes as messages from gods, sometimes as warnings. There are even fragments of dream books, listing possible meanings. Dream of eating crocodile. You'll gain power. Dream of drowning. You'll face danger. Dream of resting comfortably on a modern memory foam mattress. Well, that one probably never crossed their minds, but if it had, they might have called you a prophet. By the time the first hints of dawn streaked the horizon, you maybe slept in snatches. The sky grows pale, The air carries that pre-dawn coolness, and roosters, yes, those ancient noisemakers, start announcing the inevitable return of daylight. You stretch, every muscle stiff, and realize this is just one night in a lifetime of many for these villagers. No wonder Egyptians valued the afterlife so highly. The promise of eternal comfort sounds like a pretty good upgrade after sleeping on wooden headrests and reed mats for decades. The woman steps outside her doorway, stretching her arms toward the rising sun, murmuring a short prayer to Ra. You realize the cycle begins again. Dawn, labor, sweat, bread, beer, story, restless night. Life here isn't just hard, it's relentless. And yet, somehow, these people endured. You, on the other hand, already want to negotiate with the gods for a cushioned chair and 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. The morning sun is back again, and so is the work. You shuffle out of the doorway, still stiff from that reed mat, to find the village already alive with sound. Pots clattering, animals braying, and children darting between houses like little sparks of energy. There's no such thing as sleeping in here. Dawn is a command, not a suggestion. Point. One group of women gathers at a grinding stone, their bodies bent rhythmically as they crush barley into flour. The sound is steady, stone against grain, over and over, a heartbeat of survival. You try a few strokes, but your wrists ache within minutes. These women, though, keep at it with a practiced rhythm, chatting as if they weren't wearing down their muscles hour after hour. Historians still argue whether this grinding was considered strictly women's work or if men pitched in during times of stress, but either way, the expectation was clear: the bread won't make itself. Nearby, men are roping oxen to a wooden plow. The plow itself is deceptively simple, just a beam with a sharpened point that scratches the soil. No steel, no iron, just wood and stubborn determination. Yet it works. The oxen lumber forward, dragging the blade through the earth, while the man shouts encouragement and yanks at the reins. Dust rises in lazy clouds, coating his skin in a thin film that sticks like glue. You think of modern farmers with tractors and air-conditioned cabs, and you realize just how far comfort has come. Boy trails behind with a basket of seeds, scattering them into the fresh furrows. He whistles as he goes, almost cheerful. But then you see his hands, cracked and raw, nails packed with dirt. Childhood here doesn't mean toys and cartoons. It means apprenticeship and survival. By the time he's your age, he'll already have decades of labor behind him. Around mid-morning, the heat sharpens again. Workers pause to drink from clay jars of Nile water. Someone splashes their face and laughs, spraying the rest of the group. A small relief, but relief nonetheless. The Nile isn't just water, it's salvation in liquid form. Without it, no crops, no food, no Egypt. It's little wonder the river itself was worshipped like a god. People bowed to Hapi, the deity of the flood, hoping his generosity would keep the land fertile. You can feel it in every sip of cool water. This isn't just hydration, it's communion with the divine. And yet, even in this endless cycle of toil, there are small moments of joy. Two young men joke as they balance on the plow's handle, riding it like a toy before an older farmer scolds them. A girl sings while carrying reeds, her voice thin but sweet, rising above the hum of work. Life here isn't only survival. It's threaded with laughter, with stubborn sparks of happiness. Still, you feel the weight of monotony pressing down. The hours blur together. Plow, seed, water, repeat. No weekends, no holidays except the rare festival days when everyone gathers in joy. Otherwise, the work is constant, as relentless as the sun itself. You think again about the title of this journey. You wouldn't last a day. By now, it's not just the heat or the hunger. It's the grind, the endless sameness, the reality that tomorrow looks exactly like today. As the sun climbs higher, you wipe your brow, your body already aching. The Egyptians around you barely flinch. They've done this all their lives. You, meanwhile, are just trying to keep from collapsing into the furrows. By midday, the work in the field slows, not because the labor is finished, but because the sun is merciless. The light beats down like a hammer, and you can almost hear the hiss of heat as it bounces off mud brick walls and cracked soil. Farmers drag themselves into what shade they can find, under trees, behind huts, or crouched near water jars. This isn't laziness. It's survival. You follow a family into their home, where the air is only slightly cooler but still thick and heavy. They sit cross-legged around a basket of bread, tearing off pieces and dipping them into a bowl of something that looks suspiciously like porridge. It's lentils, boiled until soft, flavored with garlic and a splash of oil. The flavor isn't bad, but the texture makes you long for anything with crunch. Then comes the beer, cloudy and yeasty, poured into cups from a clay jug. Egyptians considered it a staple, not a luxury, and even children drank weak versions of it. One sip tells you why. The grains floating in it feel like someone stirred oatmeal into your drink. Still, in this heat, you're grateful for the cool dampness sliding down your throat. Someone cracks a joke about the village's donkey, and laughter ripples around the circle. Joking at meals is timeless. It's one of those human things that binds you to these people across thousands of years. You notice how quickly they finish eating and then slump against the walls, dozing off in the half-darkness. Midday naps weren't optional luxuries. They were built into the rhythm of Egyptian life. But rest never lasts long. Soon, the family stirs again, and children shuffle out into the light carrying baskets of reeds. While the adults head back to the fields, these kids sit by the doorway, weaving mats and baskets with nimble fingers. Historians still argue whether such weaving was mostly a cottage task, or if there were larger, more organized workshops, but either way, production never stopped. Even rest time became work time. You stretch outside and glance at the Nile, gleaming silver under the punishing sun. A fisherman is out on a small papyrus skiff, tossing his net in a wide arc. From this distance, he looks like part of the river itself, bare feet steady on the reeds, arms moving in a rhythm older than writing. Fish leap briefly, flashing white in the sunlight, then vanish again. The man hauls in the net, smiling at his catch. Dinner secured, still the heat presses in, sweat soaking your linen. Shade is fleeting, breezes are rare, and every breath feels like it drags dust into your lungs. You can't help imagining what it must have been like during years when the Nile flood failed, when shade wasn't relief but a reminder that there might be no bread to eat tomorrow. That's the real fragility of this world. Abundance hangs by the thread of a river's whim. By late afternoon, the sun eases slightly, though the ground still radiates heat like a furnace. Farmers return to their furrows. Fishermen pull their boats in, and the village shakes off its drowsiness. The rhythm starts again. Work, sweat, repetition. You trudge back into the fields alongside them, knowing you'll collapse by sundown. But here, collapsing is not an option. You take one last swig of the grainy beer, sigh, and brace yourself for the second half of the day. The shadows stretch long across the ground as the afternoon deepens, but that doesn't mean the work slows much. If anything, there's a burst of frantic energy. Everyone wants to squeeze in as much labor as possible before darkness steals the light. Remember, no electric lamps, no cozy lanterns powered by batteries. Once the sun goes down, the world belongs to shadows, oil lamps, and the occasional flicker of fire. You find yourself trudging back toward the fields, where a group of men stand waist-deep in irrigation channels, their linen kilts bunched up awkwardly. They're busy digging out silt left by the Nile's retreat, scooping muck into baskets and hauling it up to the embankments. The smell is thick, wet earth, rotting plants, and the faint tang of fish that didn't survive the last flood. It isn't glamorous, but without irrigation, there would be no harvest. Historians still argue whether villages coordinated irrigation as a communal duty or whether each family maintained its own patchwork system. But standing here, you can see how complicated it must have been. Children run along the banks with clay jars, scooping water and pouring it into smaller furrows to guide it toward the crops. Their bare feet slap against the mud, and their laughter makes the chore seem almost like play, until you notice the serious expressions on the adults' faces watching them. There's no margin for error. Let a furrow collapse, and a field dries out. Miss a day of digging, and the plants wither. The stakes are always that high. You bend to help, gripping a rough wooden tool shaped like a hoe. It doesn't take long before your shoulders burn from motion. You think about gym memberships and rowing machines, and suddenly they seem laughable. Why would anyone pay to simulate work when you could just live in ancient Egypt and get the authentic workout for free? The villagers would probably laugh if you told them people in your time lift heavy objects for fun. As the water trickles through the furrows, frogs croak loudly, announcing their evening chorus. One leaps near your foot, startling you enough to make the kids laugh. Frogs were considered a symbol of fertility here, tied to the goddess Hecate, who often appeared with a frog's head. Life here is so woven into nature that every creature, frog, ibis, crocodile, has a sacred weight to it. Even the bugs buzzing around your head have roles in mythology, though right now their role seems to be making you itch. The sun finally softens into a bronze disk, lowering toward the horizon. Farmers gather their tools, shouldering them with weary shrugs. The air cools slightly, though the ground still radiates the day's stored heat. You follow the villagers back toward their cluster of homes, a parade of tired bodies dragging shadows behind them. Faint smell of wood smoke drifts across the evening air. Dinner is already in the making, fires crackling, clay pots bubbling, voices rising in chatter. For a moment, the exhaustion of the day fades into something gentler. There's comfort in the sameness, in knowing everyone endured the same sun, the same dust, the same ache in their bones. You, however, are wobbling like someone who's been on a treadmill for 12 hours straight. Your body protests every step, and you're pretty sure you've invented 3 new blisters on your feet. Survival here isn't just about food or floods. It's about stamina, about repeating the cycle tomorrow and the day after that. And as twilight deepens, you realize you wouldn't last a week. By the time the last light of day slips behind the horizon, the village is already glowing faintly with pinpricks of fire. Oil lamps flicker from doorways, smoke curling into the dusky sky. You step into one home and immediately feel the warmth of a small flame tucked inside a niche in the mud brick wall. The flame dances, reflected in the wide, dark eyes of children sitting nearby. Evening is a family affair. The day's main meal begins. A pot of lentil stew thickened with barley, a flat loaf of bread pulled from the clay oven, maybe a few dried figs if fortune has smiled. The stew is seasoned with coriander seeds and a pinch of salt from the desert edges, flavors simple but grounding. You take a bite of the bread and nearly chip a tooth. No one here seems to notice the occasional grit of sand in their food. Grinding stones always left traces in the flour. Archaeologists today find Egyptian skeletons with teeth so worn down they look like sandpaper. You spit the grit discreetly, though a small boy grins knowingly as if to say, "Welcome to dinner in Egypt." As the food disappears, so do the day's tensions. Laughter sparks, stories begin. An elder recounts a tale of a trickster god, maybe Set, maybe someone else, depending on how the story's been handed down. Historians still argue whether many of these myths were originally meant as solemn religion, casual fireside entertainment. But sitting here, hearing the chuckles and gasps, you suspect it was both at once. Children curl into laps, and someone plucks at a simple stringed instrument. The notes are soft, almost sleepy, blending with the crackle of fire. You lean back against the wall, the clay cool against your shoulders, and let your eyelids drift lower. Then comes the smoke, sharp, resinous. Someone tosses a pinch of frankincense into the fire. The room fills with its sweet, heady aroma, thick enough to make you lightheaded. It was prized for ritual, but maybe it doubles as a kind of ancient air freshener. You remember how different nighttime feels without modern noise. No traffic hum, no buzzing appliances. Just the croak of frogs, the trill of insects, and the murmur of voices fading into yawns. Darkness feels heavier here, like a blanket laid over the land. You realize how much people in your world fight the night with electricity, when for these villagers, surrendering to it is the natural order. A neighbor steps in briefly to borrow a tool, greeted with easy familiarity. Privacy is not much of a concept here. The community is porous, doors are open, and everyone knows everyone else's business. It might drive you mad in your own world, but in this one, survival depends on it. You couldn't isolate yourself if you tried. The oil lamp sputters, smoke curling like a lazy serpent. Someone tends it, adjusting the wick, pouring in a little more oil. The flame steadies, casting long shadows on the mud brick walls. In the flicker, painted amulets seem to wink, little charms of Bess, the squat, grinning protector god, and Tauret, the hippo goddess of childbirth. The people here don't trust the night entirely. Spirits, snakes, and unseen dangers linger in the dark, so protection is always nearby. As the family curls onto woven mats, covering themselves with light blankets, you settle into your corner. The floor is hard, the air cool, and your muscles ache from every unfamiliar task. Yet there's something hypnotic about the rhythm, the sense that this day has happened 10,000 times before and will happen 10,000 times again. You exhale slowly, watching the lamp flame pulse like a heartbeat, and you know sleep will come quickly. If you can ignore the buzzing mosquitoes, the night stretches on, thick and unbroken, until a sound pulls you from the thin edge of sleep. It's faint at first, a shuffle, low hum, then the hollow beat of a drum. You sit up, blinking, as the family stirs too. Not all nights in Egypt are restful. Some are alive with ritual. Tonight, the village is gathering. You step outside into the cool darkness, the stars so bright they feel close enough to touch. The Nile glimmers faintly under the moon, and from its banks rises a procession of figures carrying torches. Their flames weave like golden serpents through the black. The drums grow louder, steady and slow, pulling you into their rhythm. The ritual begins with chanting, a sing-song rise and fall of voices, old words that no one here could probably trace back to their origin. Historians still argue whether many of these village rites were strictly tied to temple religion, or if they belonged to a more ancient folk tradition, older than the pyramids themselves. Whatever the case, the sound coils around you, hypnotic, like the desert wind caught in a jar. Someone hands you a sprig of herbs, fennel, maybe, or wormwood, and gestures for you to wave it through the smoke curling from a small brazier. The air is thick with scents, burning resins, herbs, something that stings your throat as you breathe it in. You realize suddenly that rituals weren't just spiritual. They were sensory experiences, overwhelming enough to push you out of your ordinary self. Women step forward, swaying slowly, their movements guided by the drumbeat. Anklets of shells and beads rattle with each step. Children clap in time, wide-eyed but not frightened. You wonder if they'll remember these nights as part of the fabric of life, just as you remember bedtime stories from childhood. A goat is brought forward, its bleeding sharp against the chanting. It isn't slaughtered here. It's offered symbolically, adorned with ribbons, before being led away. The point, it seems, is not blood but gesture, the promise of giving. The torches flare brighter as more oil is poured, the flames crackling like impatient gods. Someone raises a bowl of beer skyward, spilling a splash onto the ground in offering. You think back to the midday drink, how coarse and gritty it was, and now realize it serves two purposes: nourishment and communion. Beer connects earth to heaven, body to spirit. You take a sip yourself and feel the sour tang coat your tongue. A moment of stillness follows. The drumbeat stops. The chanting ceases. The village waits in silence, listening. For what? You're not sure. Maybe for a breeze. Maybe for the croak of a frog. Maybe for something that isn't of this world. Your skin prickles in the quiet. Then, as if on cue, the drum resumes, and laughter bursts through the tension. People smile, relieved, joyous, alive. It's striking how much ritual is woven into survival here. They don't separate work, food, or prayer the way your world does. Life itself is ritual, whether plowing a furrow or pouring out a libation. Even their sleep is hedged with magic amulets and whispered prayers. For Egyptians, the sacred is never far away. You return with the family to their home, the smoke still clinging to your hair, the drumbeat echoing faintly in your skull. Curling once more onto the mat, you feel the heaviness of exhaustion, but also something else, a strange calm, as if the ritual had reached across time to steady your pulse. You realize that while you might never last a single day here physically, some part of you could grow used to this rhythm of darkness, firelight, and shared belief. The lamp gutters once more, and your eyes slip shut. The drumbeat carries you into dreams. The dawn doesn't so much arrive as seeps slowly across the horizon, painting the Nile in pale silver before the sun even breaks through. You wake with the family once more, though your body aches like you've been doing field work for years instead of a few days. Their rhythm has become your rhythm. Wake with the light, work with the sun, sleep with the stars. You shuffle outside, barefoot on packed earth, and notice how the world is already in motion. Farmers head to the river to coax water into ditches. Women crouch near hearths, blowing on embers. A fisherman checks his nets strung out overnight. The same tasks repeated endlessly, and yet each morning feels different. Some combination of weather, of the Nile's level, of the quiet moods of the people. It strikes you how small your place here would be. You wouldn't be a hero, a pharaoh, or even a priest. You'd just be another pair of hands in the endless human chain that kept Egypt running. You'd learn the tools, endure the sun, eat the bread, drink the beer, and hope the Nile didn't betray you this year. No room for self-importance, just the humility of being one life in thousands. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians themselves were content in this cycle or if they resented it quietly. The records we have are filtered through scribes, priests, and stone-carved propaganda. But one thing is clear: the system endured for millennia, and people kept showing up to grind a grain, dig the canals, and sing the harvest songs. That kind of persistence doesn't happen without some sense of belonging. A quirky thought occurs to you. If you were dropped here for real, you'd probably panic within hours. But if you somehow stayed, you might adjust. Slowly, painfully, yes, but eventually the rhythm might seep into you. You'd curse the heat, sweat flies, burn your skin, and still find yourself laughing with neighbors at sunset. Maybe that's the secret. Egypt didn't need you to last a day. Egypt taught you how to last a lifetime. As the sun finally clears the horizon, a rooster crows shrill and proud. You realize it's time to leave this place behind, slip back through the folds of imagination, and return to your own bed, where the hardest task tomorrow might be scrolling emails instead of hauling water. You smile at the absurdity, but the images linger. Torches along the Nile, children playing in dust, the steady beat of drums in the night. Egypt may be ancient, but it isn't dead. It's here stitched into human memory, whispering in a hum of rivers and the warmth of sunlight. And with that thought, your eyelids grow heavy again, the morning sound dissolving into something softer, slower, more dreamlike. Word count 1066. Wind down 300 words, and now let the last fragments of Egypt drift away like silt on the river. The clatter of tools, the cries of children, the rhythm of drums, all of it grows fainter, folding into distance. You no longer feel the hot sting of the sun, nor the grit of sand in your sandals. Instead, imagine yourself lying back beneath the shade of a broad, ancient tree. The air is still warm, but it moves gently, a soft breeze brushing your skin like a cool cloth. Your breathing slows, steady as the Nile itself. Inhale long and deep exhale, calm and easy. Each breath carries you further from the busyness of labor and closer to a place of quiet rest. The sounds of life blur into one soft murmur, like water against stone, like bees in a summer meadow, like pages turning slowly in a book. Let your body sink heavy and safe, as though you were resting on the riverbank, the earth holding you firmly, gently, without effort. Time stretches, slows, loses its edge. You don't need to build, or work, or even think. All you need to do is rest. If any stray thought arrives, just let it drift past, like a reed carried along the current. You don't need to hold it, don't need to chase it. Watch it float away, then return to the rhythm of your breath, simple and calm. The Nile fades to silence, the stars return overhead, and you remain still, cradled in the quiet. Let go. Let the story dissolve, and let yourself sink into the kind of sleep the ancients themselves might have known, deep, steady, dream-woven, endless. Good night and sleep well.